The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as Marcus Thompson adjusted his camera strap and checked his phone for the 100th time. The 24-year-old social media influencer from Los Angeles had spent 3 months planning this trip to London, but not for the reasons most tourists visited the historic city. While others came to see Big Ben or ride the London Eye, Marcus had one singular goal: to create the most viral prank video the internet had ever seen. Marcus had built his following of 2.3 million subscribers on increasingly outrageous stunts. His YouTube channel, Marcus Max Adventures, featured everything from fake proposals in public spaces to pretending to be lost in foreign countries while speaking made-up languages. Each video garnered millions of views, lucrative sponsorship deals, and enough ad revenue to fund his lifestyle of constant travel and expensive equipment. But lately, the views had been plateauing, and Marcus felt the pressure to push boundaries even further. Standing across from the iconic red-uniformed guards at Buckingham Palace, Marcus surveyed his target. The changing of the guard ceremony wouldn't begin for another 2 hours, but already dozens of tourists had gathered behind the black iron gates, cameras ready to capture the famous spectacle. Marcus had done his research extensively. He knew the guards were trained to remain motionless and expressionless regardless of what happened around them. They were living statues, symbols of British tradition and discipline, perfect targets for his plan. The idea had come to him 3 weeks earlier while watching compilation videos of tourists trying to make the guards react. Most attempts were harmless and predictable: funny faces, loud noises, silly dances. But Marcus wanted something different, something that would genuinely shock viewers and guarantee millions of shares across social media platforms. He had considered several options before settling on what he believed would be the perfect prank. His plan was deceptively simple. He would approach one of the guards with a large cup of coffee, pretend to trip, and splash the hot liquid across the guard's pristine red tunic and tall black bearskin hat. The shock value would be enormous. No one had ever been bold enough to actually mess with the guards' uniforms. The video would spread like wildfire, generating controversy, debate, and, most importantly, views. Marcus had even prepared a follow-up apology video to milk the story for additional content. Marcus had spent considerable time studying the guards' positions and rotations. He knew they stood at their posts for exactly 2 hours before being relieved, during which time they were expected to remain completely still except for occasional prescribed movements. He had timed his approach perfectly, arriving when the guard would be at the midpoint of his shift, theoretically when concentration might be at its lowest. The coffee cup Marcus carried was specially prepared. He had purchased the largest size available from a nearby cafe, but instead of filling it with scalding hot coffee that could cause actual harm, he had used lukewarm coffee mixed with chocolate syrup to create a thick, messy consistency that would look dramatic on camera, but wouldn't burn anyone. Despite his attention-seeking nature, Marcus wasn't cruel. He wanted viral fame, not to seriously injure someone doing their job. His camera equipment was strategically positioned. Marcus had convinced his friend Jake, who had accompanied him on this London trip, to film from across the street with a high-quality telephoto lens. Additionally, Marcus wore a small action camera clipped to his jacket, ensuring they would capture multiple angles of the incident. He had even arranged for a third camera operated by a hired local videographer who would film from yet another position, creating the multi-angle footage that would make the prank appear even more dramatic and professional. As Marcus approached the palace gates, his heart raced with anticipation. He had rehearsed his stumble dozens of times in his hotel room, practicing the exact motion that would send coffee flying in the most visually impressive arc while making it appear completely accidental. The guard he had selected stood perfectly still, eyes fixed straight ahead, the morning light reflecting off the brass buttons of his red tunic. The crowd of tourists was perfect for his purposes, large enough to provide witnesses and additional camera phones to capture the moment, but not so dense that he couldn't maneuver freely. Marcus had even identified several families with children, knowing that their shocked reactions would add an extra layer of entertainment value to the footage. Everything was falling into place exactly as he had planned. Marcus took a deep breath and began his approach. The guard, whose name was actually William Harrison, had been serving in the Queen's Guard for 4 years. At 26 years old, William took immense pride in his role protecting the monarchy and upholding centuries of tradition. He had endured countless attempts by tourists to break his concentration, from people making faces inches from his nose to individuals shouting insults or compliments trying to provoke a reaction. Nothing had ever succeeded in making him break protocol. William had noticed the young man with the coffee cup lingering nearby for the past 20 minutes, but tourists often spent extended periods photographing the guards, so this wasn't unusual. William's training had taught him to be aware of everything in his peripheral vision while maintaining his forward gaze. He could see the amateur cameraman across the street, the excited family with young children pointing in his direction, and the steady stream of visitors walking past taking selfies. What William didn't know was that Marcus had spent hours studying videos of guard interactions online, learning about their training and discipline. Marcus believed he had identified a vulnerability in their protocol. The guards were trained to react only to genuine threats to security, not to minor incidents or annoyances. A tourist accidentally spilling coffee wouldn't register as a threat, meaning the guard would likely continue standing at attention even while covered in coffee, creating the perfect comedic image. Marcus had also researched the potential legal consequences of his prank. He had discovered that while technically he could be charged with disturbing the peace or even assault, most incidents involving tourists at royal sites resulted in nothing more than removal from the premises and possibly a warning. The risk seemed minimal compared to the potential reward of internet fame and the financial benefits that would follow. As Marcus drew closer to his target, he began his performance. He pulled out his phone and started filming a selfie video, speaking loudly enough for nearby tourists to hear. "Hey everyone, Marcus here from sunny California. I'm standing right outside Buckingham Palace about to get the perfect shot with one of these amazing guards. This is definitely going on my Instagram story." He waved enthusiastically at the motionless William, who remained focused straight ahead. The performance served multiple purposes. It established Marcus as a typical excited tourist, making his upcoming accident seem more believable. It also ensured that other tourists would be filming him, creating additional footage of the incident that would inevitably find its way online, amplifying the viral nature of his stunt. Marcus had learned from studying other viral moments that multiple perspectives and organic spread were crucial for maximum impact. Marcus positioned himself at the optimal angle, coffee cup held at just the right height. He continued his enthusiastic tourist act, commenting loudly about the guard's impressive uniform and stoic demeanor. Several other visitors had begun watching his animated display, some finding his American enthusiasm amusing, others slightly annoying. Marcus counted on this attention, knowing that witnesses would make the incident seem more legitimate and newsworthy. The moment had arrived. Marcus took his final step toward the guard, raised his phone for one last selfie, and prepared to execute the stumble that would launch him to internet stardom. He had no idea that his carefully planned prank was about to spiral completely out of his control, transforming from a simple viral video attempt into an international incident that would change his life forever. The coffee cup felt heavy in his hand as he prepared to make what he believed would be the smartest career move of his young life, unaware that he was about to make the biggest mistake instead. The moment Marcus executed his planned stumble, everything began to go wrong in ways he had never anticipated. His carefully rehearsed trip was meant to look accidental while giving him complete control over the direction and force of the coffee splash. However, as he stepped forward and began his fake stumble, his foot caught on an uneven cobblestone that he hadn't noticed during his reconnaissance. What was supposed to be a controlled performance instantly became a genuine fall. Marcus felt his balance disappear as his ankle twisted painfully. The coffee cup flew from his hand with far more force than intended, and instead of the controlled arc he had practiced, the lukewarm coffee and chocolate mixture exploded outward in a chaotic spray. The liquid hit not just the target guard, William Harrison, but also splattered across two other guards who were positioned nearby during their rotation change that Marcus hadn't accounted for. The reaction was immediate and far more intense than Marcus had ever imagined. William Harrison, despite 4 years of training to remain motionless, couldn't help but flinch as the sticky mixture hit his face and began dripping down his ceremonial uniform. The chocolate syrup Marcus had added to make the coffee more visible on camera had an unintended consequence. It began staining the pristine red wool of the guard's tunic almost immediately. But what truly shocked Marcus was the response of the other guards and palace security. Within seconds of the coffee hitting the guards, whistles began blowing and armed officers appeared from positions Marcus hadn't even known existed. He had expected perhaps a stern talking to from a single security guard, maybe an escort off the premises. Instead, he found himself surrounded by 6 armed officers shouting commands in crisp British accents. "Get down on the ground immediately. Hands where we can see them." The lead security officer's voice cut through the morning air with unmistakable authority. Marcus, still sprawled on the cobblestones from his genuine fall, looked up in bewilderment at the circle of stern faces and pointed weapons. This was definitely not going according to plan. The tourists who had been watching Marcus's enthusiastic display moments earlier now screamed and scattered in panic. Parents grabbed their children and ran toward the street, while others pressed themselves against the palace gates, unsure whether they were witnessing a terrorist attack or an elaborate prank. The cheerful morning atmosphere around Buckingham Palace had transformed into chaos in a matter of seconds. Marcus tried to speak, his voice cracking with fear and confusion. Wait. It was just an accident. I tripped. I'm just a tourist. But his protests were drowned out by the continued shouting of security officers and the wailing of sirens that seemed to be approaching from every direction. Through his panic, Marcus could hear Jake calling his name from across the street. But the police had already begun cordoning off the area. What Marcus didn't understand was that palace security operated under protocols developed over decades of real threats. The guards weren't just ceremonial figures. They were active military personnel responsible for protecting one of the most important buildings in the United Kingdom. Any assault on a guard, intentional or accidental, triggered immediate and overwhelming response procedures. Detective Inspector Sarah Chun had been monitoring palace security feeds from the control room when the incident occurred. With 15 years of experience in royal protection, she had seen countless tourist incidents, but something about this situation immediately raised red flags. The young man's behavior before the incident, captured clearly on multiple security cameras, suggested premeditation rather than accident. Pull up cameras 7, 12, and 15. Chun commanded her subordinate. I want to see everything this individual did in the 30 minutes before the incident. As the footage rolled, Chin's suspicions were confirmed. The tourist had been surveying the guards' positions, timing their movements, and positioning himself deliberately. This wasn't an accident, it was a planned assault. Meanwhile, Marcus remained face down on the cobblestones, his hands zip-tied behind his back as armed officers maintained their positions around him. His expensive camera equipment had been confiscated, and he could see Jake being questioned aggressively by police across the street. The viral video Marcus had dreamed of was certainly being created, but he was the victim rather than the star. The stained guards had been quickly replaced and escorted inside for medical evaluation and uniform changes. William Harrison, despite his training, was shaken by the experience. The chocolate syrup mixture was proving difficult to remove from his ceremonial bearskin hat, a piece of military equipment that held centuries of tradition and cost thousands of pounds to replace. As Marcus was hauled to his feet and marched toward a waiting police van, he caught sight of dozens of phones pointed in his direction. Every tourist in the area was filming the aftermath of his prank, and he realized with growing horror that his face was being broadcast across social media platforms in real time. But instead of being celebrated as a clever prankster, he was being portrayed as a dangerous individual who had attacked the Queen's Guard. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was indeed achieving viral fame, just not in the way he had intended. Hashtag Buckingham Palace attack was already trending on Twitter, with eyewitness videos showing his dramatic takedown by armed officers. The narrative spreading across the internet painted him as either a terrorist or a dangerously unstable American tourist, not the harmless content creator he had intended to appear as. Inside the police van, Marcus tried to process what had just happened. His ankle throbbed from his genuine fall, his wrists ached from the restraints, and his mind raced as he considered the potential consequences of his failed stunt. He had researched minor infractions and tourist warnings, but the response he was experiencing suggested much more serious charges were likely. The van ride to the police station took 20 minutes through London traffic, during which Marcus overheard radio chatter discussing his case. Terms like assault on military personnel, potential terrorist incident, and international incident made his stomach drop. He began to realize that his silly prank had somehow escalated into a major security situation with implications far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Detective Inspector Chun arrived at the station shortly after Marcus was processed into custody. She had spent the van ride reviewing his social media profiles, which painted a clear picture of an attention-seeking individual with a history of increasingly dangerous stunts. His YouTube channel showed a pattern of escalating behavior designed to shock and provoke reactions from unsuspecting members of the public. Marcus Thompson, age 24, from Los Angeles, California, Chen read from her notes as she entered the interrogation room. 2.3 million YouTube subscribers, specializing in public pranks and stunts. Previous videos include fake emergencies, disrupting public events, and harassing service workers. This isn't your first time crossing the line, is it, Marcus? Marcus looked up at the detective with red, tired eyes. The gravity of his situation was finally beginning to sink in. Look, I know this looks bad, but I swear it was just supposed to be a harmless prank. I never meant to hurt anyone or cause this kind of trouble. I just wanted to make a funny video. Chen sat down across from him, her expression stern but not unkind. Marcus, what you did today wasn't just a harmless prank. You assaulted 3 members of Her Majesty's military while they were performing their duties. You caused a major security incident at one of the most protected buildings in the country. And you did it all while being filmed for profit. This is very serious indeed. As Chen began explaining the potential charges Marcus was facing, he felt his world crumbling around him. Assault charges, potential terrorism investigations, civil lawsuits from the military for damage to ceremonial uniforms, and deportation proceedings were all on the table. The viral fame he had sought was becoming a nightmare that would follow him for the rest of his life. Outside the police station, news vans were already setting up as word of the incident spread through British media. The story was being picked up by international outlets, with headlines ranging from American tourist attacks Queen's Guard to YouTuber's prank goes horribly wrong at Buckingham Palace. Marcus Thompson was about to become famous worldwide, but for all the wrong reasons. The interrogation room at Westminster Police Station felt smaller with each passing hour as Detective Inspector Sarah Chun methodically dismantled Marcus Thompson's claim that the coffee incident had been an innocent accident. Spread across the metal table between them were printed screenshots from Marcus's social media accounts, showing a disturbing pattern of escalating pranks that had grown increasingly aggressive and invasive over the past 2 years. Let's talk about this video from 6 months ago, Chen said, sliding a photograph across the table. You pretended to have a heart attack in the middle of Times Square, causing 3 different people to call emergency services. Paramedics, police, and fire department all responded to what they thought was a genuine medical emergency. Do you remember that, Marcus? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the hard plastic chair, his ankles still aching from his fall at the palace. The adrenaline that had carried him through the arrest had long since faded, replaced by a growing sense of dread as he began to understand how his previous content was being used to build a case against him. That was different, he mumbled. Nobody got hurt in that one. Chen raised an eyebrow. Nobody got hurt. Marcus, emergency services in New York City responded to your fake emergency instead of potentially real ones. You wasted taxpayer resources, traumatized Good Samaritans who thought they were witnessing someone die, and you filmed their genuine distress for entertainment. How is that harmless? The detective continued pulling out more evidence of Marcus's previous stunts. There was the time he had pretended to be kidnapped in a busy shopping mall, causing a lockdown and police response. The incident where he had staged a fake robbery at a small family restaurant, terrifying customers and staff. The elaborate prank where he had convinced an entire apartment building that there was a gas leak, leading to an evacuation and visit from the fire department. Each of these incidents shows planning, Marcus. Premeditation. You didn't just wake up this morning and accidentally trip with a cup of coffee. You've been building towards something like today's incident for months, maybe years. Your content has become increasingly dangerous and disruptive, and now you've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Meanwhile, across London at the American Embassy, Consular Officer Jennifer Walsh was fielding increasingly frantic phone calls from Marcus's parents back in Los Angeles. Robert and Linda Thompson had woken up to find their son's face plastered across every major news website in America, described alternately as a terrorist, prankster, or dangerously unstable individual who had attacked British military personnel. Mrs. Thompson, I understand your concern, Walsh said into her headset while reviewing the file that had been rushed to her desk. Your son is currently in custody, and we're working to ensure he has proper legal representation. However, I need to be honest with you about the seriousness of the charges he's facing. Linda Thompson's voice cracked through the phone. But it was just a prank. Marcus does silly videos online. He's not a terrorist. This has to be some kind of misunderstanding. Walsh had heard similar pleas from family members countless times, but the evidence in Marcus's case was particularly damning. Ma'am, attacking military personnel at a royal residence is considered a very serious crime here in the United Kingdom. Your son could be facing years in prison, and even if he avoids jail time, he'll likely be banned from entering the UK ever again. This isn't a simple prank gone wrong. This is an international incident. Back at Buckingham Palace, the incident had triggered a comprehensive security review that reached the highest levels of the Royal Protection Unit. Commander Michael Roberts, head of Royal Security, stood in the control room watching footage of Marcus's attack from multiple angles while briefing senior officials about the breach in palace safety protocols. The individual clearly planned this assault, Roberts explained to the gathered officials. Our analysis shows he surveilled the guards' positions for approximately 25 minutes before executing his attack. He had multiple cameras positioned to record the incident, suggesting this was premeditated content creation rather than spontaneous tourist behavior. The damaged ceremonial uniforms had been sent for professional analysis to determine if they could be restored or would need to be completely replaced. The bearskin hats alone were valued at over £3,000 each, and the chocolate syrup mixture Marcus had used was proving particularly difficult to remove without damaging the historic materials. Guard William Harrison sat in the medical office, still shaken by the morning's events. In his 4 years of service, he had never experienced anything like the shock of being suddenly covered in sticky liquid while trying to maintain his ceremonial duties. The mixture had gotten into his eyes and mouth, and while medical tests confirmed it was harmless, the psychological impact of the assault was significant. I keep thinking about how it could have been something worse, Harrison confided to the military psychologist who was conducting his post-incident evaluation. What if it hadn't been coffee? What if he'd had acid or some kind of chemical weapon? I would have been completely defenseless standing there at attention. The psychologist nodded sympathetically. That's a very normal reaction, William. You've been trained to trust that the public will respect your role and the traditions you represent. When someone violates that trust so deliberately, it can shake your confidence in the entire system. Harrison's concerns weren't unfounded. Intelligence analysts were already reviewing Marcus's case to determine if he had connections to any anti-monarchy groups or if his attack could have been politically motivated. While his social media history suggested he was simply an attention-seeking prankster, the thoroughness of his planning raised questions about whether he had received assistance or encouragement from others. In a conference room at New Scotland Yard, a crisis management team was meeting to discuss the broader implications of Marcus's attack. The incident had already sparked dozens of copycat attempts at other royal sites across the country, with tourists trying to recreate Marcus's success for their own social media fame. We've had 17 separate incidents in the past 4 hours, reported Sergeant Davies, reading from a tablet full of police reports. Everything from fake trips with water bottles to people throwing food at guards in Edinburgh, Cardiff, and Windsor. The Thompson incident has inspired a wave of similar attacks across all our royal sites. The team realized they were dealing with more than just one reckless American tourist. Marcus's video, which was spreading rapidly across social media platforms despite attempts to remove it, had inadvertently created a blueprint for attacking the Queen's Guard. The incident was inspiring others to attempt similar stunts, turning a single prank into a national security concern. Detective Inspector Chun returned to the interrogation room with new information that would make Marcus's situation even worse. Marcus, I've just received word that your little stunt has inspired at least 17 copycat attacks on royal guards across the country today. People are watching your video and trying to recreate what you did. You're not just facing charges for your own actions anymore. You're potentially liable for inspiring others to commit similar crimes. Marcus's face went pale as he processed this information. But I never told anyone to do that. I didn't even get to post the video. You guys arrested me before I could upload anything. His voice was rising in panic as he began to understand that his situation was spiraling completely out of control. It doesn't matter what you intended to post, Chen replied calmly. Other tourists filmed your attack and shared it online immediately. Your friend Jake was live streaming the entire incident on your social media accounts. The video has been viewed over 2 million times in the past 6 hours, and it's inspiring dangerous copycat behavior across the country. As evening approached, Marcus remained in custody while lawyers on both sides of the Atlantic worked frantically to navigate the complex legal situation his prank had created. What had started as a simple plan to create viral content had evolved into an international incident involving multiple government agencies, diplomatic channels, and potentially years of legal consequences. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved that Marcus had indeed achieved his goal of viral fame. But the price of that fame was turning out to be far higher than he had ever imagined possible. 24 hours after the coffee incident, Marcus Thompson sat in a holding cell at Westminster Police Station, staring at the concrete walls while the full scope of his situation became increasingly clear. His phone had been confiscated as evidence, cutting him off from the social media empire he had spent years building. But the guards occasionally provided updates about the international media storm swirling around his case. The story had exploded far beyond anything Marcus could have imagined. CNN, BBC, Fox News, and networks across Europe were running segments about the Buckingham Palace assault, with experts debating everything from social media culture to royal security protocols. Marcus's face was being broadcast around the world, but instead of the heroic prankster narrative he had envisioned, he was being portrayed as the poster child for everything wrong with internet culture. Legal troubles were mounting faster than Marcus could process them. His court-appointed solicitor, Amanda Price, arrived that morning with a stack of paperwork that outlined the multiple charges he was facing. "Marcus, I need you to understand the severity of your situation," she said, settling into the uncomfortable metal chair across from him. "The Crown Prosecution Service is moving forward with charges of assault on military personnel, criminal damage to government property, and public disorder." Price spread out several documents, each one representing a different aspect of Marcus's legal nightmare. The assault charges alone carry a potential sentence of up to 5 years in prison. The criminal damage charges are based on the cost of replacing or restoring the ceremonial uniforms you damaged, which could reach £15,000. And that's before we even discuss the civil lawsuits that are likely coming. Marcus felt his world crashing down as Price continued explaining his situation. The military is considering a civil suit for the cost of the damaged uniforms, medical evaluations for the affected guards, and the expense of the security response your incident triggered. Additionally, the Metropolitan Police are calculating the cost of the resources deployed in response to your actions and the copycat incidents your video inspired. The copycat incidents had become a major problem across the United Kingdom. In the 48 hours following Marcus's coffee attack, police had arrested 23 individuals for similar assaults on royal guards and historic sites. The incidents ranged from throwing drinks to more serious attacks involving paint and even eggs. Each arrest report specifically mentioned Marcus's viral video as inspiration, building a legal case that he had incited others to commit crimes. At Windsor Castle, another American tourist named Derek Collins had been arrested after attempting to recreate Marcus's coffee throw using hot chocolate. Unlike Marcus's lukewarm mixture, Collins had used genuinely hot liquid that caused minor burns to a guard's hand. Collins was facing more serious assault charges, and his lawyer was already arguing that he had been inspired and encouraged by Marcus's widely shared video. The social media response to Marcus's arrest was dividing along predictable lines. His existing fanbase was rallying to his defense, creating hashtags like #FreeMarcusMax and #PrankNotAttack, arguing that his intentions had been harmless and that the British authorities were overreacting. They pointed to his history of comedic content and insisted that cultural differences were being misinterpreted as criminal intent. However, a much larger and more vocal group was condemning Marcus's actions as disrespectful, dangerous, and representative of broader problems with social media culture. British users were particularly outraged, viewing his attack as an assault on their history and traditions. American users were split, with many expressing embarrassment that an American tourist had created such an international incident. YouTube had suspended Marcus's channel pending investigation, freezing his ad revenue, and removing his ability to post new content. Instagram and TikTok had followed suit, effectively destroying the social media empire that had funded his lifestyle and travels. Sponsorship deals worth hundreds of thousands of dollars were being canceled as companies distanced themselves from the negative publicity surrounding his case. Back in Los Angeles, Marcus's parents were struggling to cope with the media attention their son's actions had generated. Reporters had been camping outside their suburban home for 2 days, shouting questions about Marcus's childhood, mental health, and family values whenever Robert or Linda Thompson appeared. Their neighbors were complaining about the disruption, and Robert's employer had suggested he take unpaid leave until the situation resolved. "We raised him better than this," Linda Thompson told a reporter from the local news station, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus was always creative and energetic, but we never thought he would do something so disrespectful and dangerous. We're horrified by his actions and deeply sorry to everyone he hurt." The family was also facing financial pressure as legal costs mounted. Hiring international lawyers capable of handling Marcus's case was expensive, and the potential civil damages could bankrupt them. They had started a crowdfunding campaign to help with legal expenses, but it was being overwhelmed by negative comments from people who felt Marcus deserved whatever punishment he received. Meanwhile, the 3 guards affected by Marcus's attack were dealing with their own challenges. William Harrison had been placed on administrative leave while undergoing psychological evaluation, a standard procedure after any assault on military personnel. The evaluation would determine if he was fit to return to ceremonial duties or if the incident had caused lasting trauma that would affect his performance. The other 2 guards, Lance Corporal James Wright and Private Daniel Murphy, had also been affected by the incident. Wright had gotten coffee mixture in his eyes during the attack and required medical treatment, while Murphy's ceremonial sword had been damaged when he instinctively moved to protect himself. All 3 men were struggling with the aftermath of being attacked while performing duties they took immense pride in. The restoration experts working on the damaged uniforms had delivered their preliminary assessment, and the news wasn't good for Marcus. 2 of the bearskin hats appeared to be damaged beyond repair and would need to be completely replaced at a cost of over £3,000 each. The red tunics were showing permanent staining despite professional cleaning attempts, meaning they too would likely need replacement. These weren't just expensive uniforms. They were pieces of British military history with traditions dating back centuries. The bearskin hats were made from the fur of Canadian black bears and handcrafted by specialists who maintained techniques passed down through generations. Each tunic was hand-tailored and featured intricate details that couldn't be easily replicated. Detective Inspector Chun was building a comprehensive case that painted Marcus as a serial offender whose pranks had escalated to dangerous levels. She had compiled evidence showing a clear pattern of behavior where Marcus deliberately targeted authority figures and public servants for his content. Police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and now military personnel had all been victims of his attention-seeking stunts. The defendant shows a clear disregard for public safety and the well-being of others, Chun wrote in her report. His social media content demonstrates an escalating pattern of behavior designed to shock and disrupt, with each incident becoming more dangerous and invasive than the last. The attack on Her Majesty's Guard represents the culmination of years of increasingly reckless behavior. The Crown Prosecution Service was taking the case seriously enough to assign it to their Specialist Terrorism Unit, not because they believed Marcus was a terrorist, but because attacks on royal sites fell under their jurisdiction regardless of motivation. This meant Marcus would be facing prosecutors with experience handling the most serious crimes against the state, significantly reducing his chances of receiving a lenient sentence. International diplomatic channels were also becoming involved as the incident strained US-UK relations at a minor but notable level. The American ambassador to the United Kingdom had been forced to issue a formal apology for Marcus's actions, while British officials were using the incident to highlight concerns about American social media culture and its influence on young people worldwide. As Marcus sat in his cell that evening, listening to the distant sounds of London traffic, he began to understand that his life would never be the same. The viral fame he had sought for years was finally his, but it came with a price he had never imagined he would have to pay. His future now depended on the mercy of a legal system he had never bothered to understand, and the consequences of his 30-second prank would follow him for the rest of his life. 6 months after the coffee incident that had changed his life forever, Marcus Thompson stood in the dock at Westminster Magistrates Court, wearing an ill-fitting suit his parents had purchased online and shipped to London. The young man who had once commanded millions of followers across social media platforms now looked gaunt and tired, the result of months of legal stress, financial pressure, and the complete destruction of his former life. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and members of the public who had followed the case since its dramatic beginning. Marcus's story had become a cautionary tale about social media culture, but it was also a very real legal proceeding with serious consequences for everyone involved. Judge Margaret Whitmore, a veteran of 30 years on the bench, had handled numerous cases involving American tourists, but few had generated this level of international attention. Marcus Thompson, Judge Whitmore began, reading from the case file. You have pleaded guilty to charges of assault on military personnel, criminal damage to government property, and public disorder. Before I pass sentence, I want to ensure you understand the full impact of your actions on that morning at Buckingham Palace. Over the past 6 months, the case had revealed details that painted Marcus's coffee attack as just the tip of an iceberg. Digital forensics experts had analyzed his confiscated devices and discovered extensive planning materials, including detailed maps of Buckingham Palace, timing charts for guard rotations, and multiple backup plans for different types of pranks. Far from being a spontaneous moment of poor judgment, the incident had been meticulously planned over several weeks. The evidence had destroyed any hope of portraying the incident as an innocent accident. Marcus's browser history showed searches for how to stain military uniforms, palace guard reaction videos, and UK laws about pranking. He had researched everything from the cost of replacing ceremonial uniforms to the typical sentences handed down for disturbing the peace. The planning was so thorough that prosecutors argued it demonstrated premeditation and a complete disregard for the consequences. Marcus's friend Jake had cooperated fully with authorities, providing detailed testimony about their conversations leading up to the incident. Jake revealed that Marcus had explicitly discussed his plan to go viral by messing with the stuffy British guards, and had even practiced his fake stumble in their hotel room the night before. This testimony had eliminated any remaining doubt about Marcus's intentions and motivations. The 3 guards affected by the attack had all provided victim impact statements that were read aloud in court. William Harrison's statement was particularly powerful, describing how the incident had shattered his confidence and trust in his ability to perform his duties. "I joined the Queen's Guard to serve my country and honor centuries of tradition," Harrison had written. "Mr. Thompson's attack has made me question everything about my role and my safety while performing ceremonial duties." Lance Corporal Wright's statement focused on the physical effects of getting coffee mixture in his eyes during the attack. While medical tests had confirmed no lasting damage, he had experienced several weeks of irritation and blurred vision that affected his daily life and military duties. Private Murphy described feeling violated and disrespected, explaining that his ceremonial sword had been a family heirloom passed down through 3 generations of military service. The financial costs of Marcus's 30-second prank had reached staggering proportions. The final tally for replacing damaged ceremonial items came to over £22,000, including 2 irreparable bearskin hats, 3 stained tunics, and Private Murphy's damaged sword. The security response had cost an additional £30,000, covering overtime for armed officers, investigation expenses, and additional security measures implemented after the incident. But the indirect costs were even higher. The wave of copycat incidents inspired by Marcus's viral video had cost British taxpayers over £200,000 in police overtime, court proceedings, and additional security measures at royal sites across the country. Insurance companies were billing Marcus for increased premiums on ceremonial items, arguing that his actions had demonstrated new vulnerabilities that required enhanced coverage. The psychological impact extended beyond the immediate victims. Palace security had implemented new protocols that fundamentally changed how tourists could interact with guards, reducing the traditional accessibility that had been a hallmark of British royal sites for decades. Tourism officials estimated that the changes would affect millions of future visitors who would face increased restrictions and security screening. Marcus's own life had been completely destroyed by his pursuit of viral fame. His social media accounts remained suspended, eliminating his primary source of income and cutting him off from the audience he had spent years building. Sponsorship deals worth over $500,000 had been canceled, and brands that had once competed for his endorsement now refused to work with anyone associated with his case. The legal costs had bankrupted his family. His parents had sold their house in Los Angeles and moved into a small apartment, using the equity to pay for international lawyers and the growing list of civil damages. Marcus's father had lost his job due to the negative publicity surrounding the case, while his mother had been forced to close her small business after customers began avoiding it due to the family's notoriety. Mental health had become a significant issue for Marcus during his months in legal limbo. Cut off from the constant validation of social media engagement and facing an uncertain future, he had experienced severe depression and anxiety. Court-mandated psychological evaluations revealed a young man struggling to understand how his pursuit of internet fame had led to such devastating consequences. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the forensic psychologist who had evaluated Marcus, testified about the broader implications of his case. Mr. Thompson represents a generation of young people who have been raised to seek validation through online engagement metrics. His escalating pattern of dangerous pranks reflects a social media culture that rewards increasingly extreme behavior with attention and financial success. The international implications of Marcus's case had continued to reverberate months after the initial incident. American tourists faced increased scrutiny at British royal sites, with some reporting longer security screenings and more suspicious treatment from guards. The incident had become a talking point in discussions about American cultural influence and the negative aspects of social media culture. British officials had used Marcus's case to highlight concerns about the impact of American social media platforms on young people worldwide. Parliament had held hearings about the regulation of prank content and influencer culture, with Marcus's attacks serving as a primary example of how online fame-seeking could escalate to dangerous real-world consequences. Judge Whitmore's sentencing took into account all of these factors as she delivered her verdict. Mr. Thompson, your actions represent a profound disrespect for British traditions, military service, and the rule of law. While I accept that you did not intend to cause physical harm, the extensive planning and premeditation behind your attack, combined with the significant financial and cultural damage you have caused, demands serious consequences. The sentence was severe but not unexpected. Marcus received 18 months in prison, with the possibility of early release after serving 12 months with good behavior. He was also ordered to pay full restitution for the damaged uniforms and security costs, a sum totaling over £50,000. Additionally, he was banned from entering the United Kingdom for 10 years after completing his sentence. The civil lawsuits were settled separately, with Marcus's insurance company agreeing to pay damages to the affected guards and additional compensation to the Royal Military for the cultural and historical significance of the damaged items. The total civil settlement exceeded $100,000, money that would be paid from his family's remaining assets and future earnings. As Marcus was led away to begin his prison sentence, the courtroom remained silent. The young man who had once commanded the attention of millions through his pranks and stunts had finally received the attention he had always craved, but the price had been higher than anyone could have imagined. His story would continue to be told as a cautionary tale about the dangers of social media fame and the real-world consequences of treating life as content. The guards at Buckingham Palace continued their ceremonial duties, but the incident had changed something fundamental about their role. The trust and respect that had allowed centuries of peaceful interaction between the British public and their military traditions had been damaged by one person's 30-second pursuit of internet fame. Marcus Thompson had achieved viral immortality, but his legacy would be one of caution rather than celebration, a reminder that some prices for fame are simply too high to pay.